I'm Larry Magid, CEO of Connect Safely, and I'm with Vicky Rideout, who is a very well-known and I would say very well-respected researcher on all things about kids and media. It's done a number of national surveys and has worked in the past and is working very much now with Common Sense Media on a report that just came out, which I found particularly interesting. It's really comparing what's going on with young people today in the midst of the pandemic to what it was like a couple of years ago, showing how things have changed and developed. And there's some disturbing news and some actually optimistic news. So I'm going to let Vicky, first of all, say hello and tell us about what you found.
Hi. Yeah, I guess the disturbing news that you mentioned has to do with the rates of depression among young people, which are really high and growing. And so when we did conduct the first wave of this survey in 2018, we were really dismayed to find that about 1 in 4 young people, and that's our survey covered ages 14 to 22, were experiencing symptoms of moderate to severe depression. We include in this survey a well-known, well-validated depression scale for measuring symptoms of depression. It's called the PHQ-8. And so 1 in 4, 25% of young people in 2018 had symptoms of moderate to severe depression. Well, this time around in 2020, conducting the survey again, updating it in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic in fall of 2020, that had gone up to 38%. So it's really a huge increase. Rates of depression had doubled among the teens and had gone up to 48% among the young adults in this survey, the 18 to 22-year-olds.
And I also noticed that for teens or children who live in families where there had been a COVID infection, it went way up to what, 56%, if I get that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, it was 51% among those who've had a COVID infection in their families compared to about 31% among those who have not been directly affected by COVID in that way. So it certainly seems as though COVID is contributing to the rise in depression among young people.
Yeah, and of course, there are literally millions of families in America that have been affected by this. So it's a non-trivial number of people who have been dealing with some severe issues. You also found out some interesting things about hate speech in social media, which is another disturbing. I hate to dwell on the disturbing.
Let's get the bad news out of the way.
Later.
Yeah, we'll get the bad news out of the way now, and then we can talk about some of the good news. But we did find an increase in exposure to hate speech on social media. So in 2018, we had asked about how often young people come across either racist, sexist, or homophobic content on social media. And the rates, and we asked it again in 2020, and now it's about 1 in 4 who say they often come across each of those kinds of content. And it's up a lot in 2 years. Now, we don't know, is that just because they're spending more time on social media, or has the amount of hate speech on social media gone up? So we can't really draw a conclusion, but their exposure to it is up.
Are you looking at any of the political, environmental things that are happening in the background? I mean, we had this bitter election. We had a lot of negative stuff happening for all of us. Do we know how much, if any, impact that had?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely affected kids. There's so much bad news and so much vitriol in social media in general in the year 2020 that it definitely affected some young people. And there, especially some of those who were experiencing higher levels of depression. And we had, it was either a 15 or 16-year-old boy in our survey who said, you know, social media connects me to the world, but then the world's problems begin to feel like my own, and there's nothing I can do about them. And so for him, using social media really contributed to his depression. But I would say among the good news that we found is that when we ask young people, when you're feeling depressed, stressed, or anxious, how does using social media usually make you feel? Does it make you feel better or worse? They're way more likely to say it usually makes them feel better than worse. So 43% say better, 17% say worse.
And getting back to that first issue of the correlation between social media and depression, as any social scientist is aware, and there was a time in my life when I was one, correlation and causation are not necessarily the same thing. So do you have any clue as to whether social media is causing depression or whether people who are more depressed are more likely to use social media?
Well, this isn't a survey that can answer that question, but I think what we've done by we're trying to add a little nuance and a little depth and understanding to that debate by talking to young people themselves and putting their voice out there in this societal debate about the role of social media in adolescent depression. So there are some who say, well, social media is causing depression among young people. There are others who say, well, young people who are really depressed just kind of sit around and mindlessly scroll through social media all day. What I think this survey does is put a third possibility on the table, which is that young people with depression, whatever the cause, are mindfully using social media and other digital tech tools, health tools, to proactively promote their own well-being. So they're feeling depressed, they're seeking inspiration through social media. They're seeking connection to other people who will give them support and encouragement. They're connecting to other people who've been through similar circumstances as they have been through online and saying, how did you get through it? What did you do? Let me try that. They're reaching out to health providers through the internet and taking suggestions from that as well. So that's what I consider to be some of the hopeful news that we take.
Well, that is good news, because we hear so much about, people who are going online and comparing themselves to the quote perfect lives that all of their friends are living. And of course, that's an illusionary perfect life. None of us live perfect lives, no matter how good we might look on Instagram. But so it's good to know that it's not just causing problems, but it's for many teens part of the solution as well.
And it really is. I mean, I hear a lot of adults talk about the compare and despair aspect of social media, but it was fascinating to me to actually talk to young people about how they use social media. And they're like, one of the kids we talked to is a non-binary 14-year-old kid. And this kid said, well, what helps me is when I see other people like me who are happily living their lives. And that gives me inspiration because it's not something I can do right now.
Yeah. And in a community as large as social media companies, you're more likely to find that person you are in your own community, especially if you live in a non-urban area. And speaking of LGBTQ youth, unfortunately, switching over to some bad news, you did find a higher rate of depression among them.
I mean, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. All hands on deck, because 2 out of 3 LGBTQ youth in our survey showed signs of moderate to severe depression. I mean, and that's compared to like 30% of non-LGBTQ youth. So it's sky high, the rates of depression. But for those young people, social media is even more important to them for connecting to other people who've been through similar experiences as they have, for sharing their artwork, their creativity, for getting inspiration. So I guess what I would say is that simplistic solutions that say, oh, you want to address adolescent depression, just get them away from their smartphones. I don't think those kind of solutions make sense.
Do you have any longitudinal data on LGBTQ youth? Do we know how this compares with previous years?
Well, we compare 2 cross-sectional samples over the years. It's not longitudinal in terms of like tracking the same young people over time. The rates of depression have gone up for everybody. The gap between LGBTQ youth and non-LGBTQ youth is pretty much the same as what it was in 2018.
Okay, because I would have hoped that it would get better, because that we're moving in a more tolerant direction as a society. Certainly among many young people I know, they seem to be much more tolerant of differences than my generation was. At least that's anecdotally what I'm observing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But unfortunately, the rates of depression have been very high since 2018. But one thing I will say that is positive is that young people, it seems like social media is playing even more of a positive role in their lives now than it was just 2 years ago. Whether this is just because we're in COVID and people don't have a whole lot of options or not, I don't know. But when we ask, does using social media usually make you feel better or worse when you're already feeling stressed or depressed or anxious? that proportion of people who say it usually makes them feel better has gone up a lot over the past 2 years. It was like 27% in 2018, and it's gone up to 43% now.
Well, now, of
And
course, it's important to note that in this last year, many of us, virtually our entire lives were lived online.
yeah,
And so it really has become so much more important. All aspects of social media, video, any online learning, you name it, has just become essential to our lives.
yeah.
This was also the year, among the other sadness of between the election and the COVID, and of course the Black Lives Matter movement and the atrocious killings that we all witnessed over the last year. Any sense of that impact on people's feelings and level of anxiety?
Yeah, I think for it's part and parcel of the sort of bad news, infuriating news, scary news, sort of can make you feel helpless type of news that is out there that we all, including young people, have been exposed to through social media. I mean, the same goes for school shootings when you think about it. So this is part and parcel of the two-edged sword that the internet can be. When there is a police killing of an unarmed Black person, a young person who's 2,000 miles away can watch that unfold live if they want to in the palm of their hand.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that device in the palm of their hand empowers them to become politically active, to join a protest movement, to connect to others, to add their voice to calls for change. So it's both things. It's both things.
Did you do any cross tabulation by race or ethnicity?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about what you found there.
Well, there actually aren't a lot of differences by race and ethnicity in terms of the general findings about either the relationship between social media and depression, how social media is used to address depression. There were not significant differences by race or ethnicity in terms of the likelihood of using tech to look up information online on a health topic, to connect to a health provider online, to use mobile apps related to health. All youth, regardless of race or ethnicity, are very likely to do all of those things.
Yeah. And at the risk of ending on yet another bad note, there was a sort of a fairly alarming data when it came to substance abuse, children feeling at risk for substance abuse. I wonder if you could talk about that, both in terms of the overall number and the number of that have actually sought help or sought information around substance abuse.
You know, we did include a scale, a substance abuse scale as well. Again, not so that we can be the be-all and end-all source of data on levels of substance abuse among young people, but more so that we can look at any differences in terms of how they use social media and digital health tools. And I believe we found about 9% of young people who were at risk for substance abuse. And what's interesting is those young people are using digital tools to address the problems that they have. They're the ones who are there looking up information online. Almost half of them had looked up information on drug and alcohol abuse online. And that compares to maybe, I don't remember, but something like 10% of other young people. So the use of digital tools for health purposes, young people are looking up information that is relevant to what they're going through. They're connecting to others online. They're connecting to services online.
And that is, of course, a silver lining, that those youth who are struggling with that do have resources to find help, and hopefully some are indeed getting that help that they need. Any other findings or understanding that the survey that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I do think it's really interesting the degree to which digital health tools across the board are being used by young people. And that's, again, looking up information, using mobile apps, whether it's related to sleep or meditation, fitness and nutrition, connecting to providers online. Almost half of young people have somehow used digital technology to connect to a provider online. They're mostly quite satisfied with that. So I think what's really interesting is digital health is here for young people. COVID may have kickstarted it to a new level. It's here. we need to be meeting young people where they are. And if we aren't, we're really missing an opportunity.
Oh, COVID, definitely. I mean, telemedicine is way, way up this year. I've used it myself. And I frankly, despite being a tech guy, had never had a virtual doctor's appointment until this year. And then we have all these, I actually have here, I don't have a heart problem, but nevertheless, those people who do, here's the way you can take your own EKG. I mean, or on your watch. I mean, there's just so many tools out there that are changing the way we relate to the medical profession.
And for young people, this is what they're growing up with, especially now that they've been through this year of COVID. So I think it's going to change the landscape a lot.
So before I let you go, any sense as to how this should inform policy or inform parents? I mean, what can we take away and act on based on the data that you've collected?
Well, I think one thing is just to add the perspective of young people as we consider this whole issue of the impact of social media and tech on mental well-being. I think that we've been quick to sort of assume that it's all negative. And I think by listening to young people's voices and acknowledging how mindfully many of them are using tech for their own well-being, I think that's an important insight right there. And then I would just say to those who are providing, who are in the business of helping young people address issues of substance use, problematic substance use, or mental health, this is where we need to be meeting young people, is in digital spaces.
So we'll put a link to your survey on ConnectSafely.org, but is there any other place people might want to go to get more information, either from you or Common Sense Media or any of your partners?
Absolutely. CommonSense.org, they have all of the research and as well as really useful ratings about media products for parents and educators. Feel free to go to vjrconsulting.com for other research that I've conducted or links to this research. I also have fact sheets that will be up there that take a special look at Latinx youth, at African-American youth, at LGBTQ youth. So you can find more information at my website there.
Well, Vicky, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I've really followed your career and have benefited so much from your work over the years. So it's great to see you're still at it. And this looks like a really important study. So thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.